The beginning of the journey. The world was bathed in twilight, a deep amber hue that painted the sky over the village of Erindor. In the heart of this small, secluded place, Caelith worked tirelessly in his forge, the rhythmic clang of his hammer echoing in the still evening air. The heat from the furnace radiated around him, but it was the quiet of the night that always brought him the greatest peace, until it was disturbed. The steady hum of the forge was broken by a deep rumble beneath his feet. Caelith paused, his hammer hovering in mid-air as the ground trembled. For a moment, he thought it was the beginning of a storm, but then the rumble grew louder, and he could hear the howl, a sound unlike anything he had ever known, far more ancient and full of power than the howls of wolves or the winds through the trees. He dropped his hammer to the anvil, feeling his heartbeat quicken. Without thinking, he grabbed his axe and headed outside, stepping into the cool evening air. The village lay still, save for the occasional flicker of firelight from the homes of others. But beyond the village, in the distance, he saw something that sent a chill down his spine. A red glow on the horizon, like fire seeping from the earth itself. Caelith moved swiftly toward the source, the rumbling growing louder with every step, until he reached the edge of the whispering woods. There, just beyond the tree line, a rift had opened in the earth, glowing with unnatural fire. Dark smoke billowed into the sky, and out of the rift, a demon emerged. Its form was colossal, a being of fire and smoke, its wings stretching wide and casting shadows over the land. The creature's eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and its roar shook the very trees around Caelith. As Caelith stared at the demon, something caught his eye, a faint flicker just past the rift. At first, he thought it was a trick of the firelight, but it didn't move like the flames. It pulsed almost alive, drawing his attention without reason he could explain. For a moment he forgot the terror in front of him, his focus shifting to this strange, out-of-place glow beyond the chaos. It felt like it was calling to him, subtle but impossible to ignore. Fear threatened to overtake him, but something within him, the sword, the weapon in the stone, compelled him to act. He couldn't simply stand by while the village was at risk. His resolve strengthened, and his steps were sure as he moved toward the rift. However, before he could close the distance, the sound of footsteps echoed from behind him. He turned to see a figure emerging from the mist of the forest. The woman was tall, her eyes sharp and observant, her long dark hair flowing in the wind. Silara, a rogue by her attire and demeanor, stood there, watching him with calculating eyes. "You're far from home, blacksmith," she said, her voice steady but carrying a hint of danger. Caelith glanced at her, then back at the fiery rift. "I could say the same to you, but it seems we're both here for the same reason." His grip tightened on the axe in his hand, but he didn't raise it. Instead, he eyed the rift warily. "What is this?" Silara's gaze never wavered. She took a step forward, her eyes flicking toward the demon as it roared again, its form burning brighter. "That thing. It's not supposed to be here. It came through a tear in the world, the rift. It's been waiting." "Waiting for what?" Caelith asked, feeling the pulse of the land beneath his feet, as if the earth itself was reacting to the creature's presence. "For someone to pull the sword," Silara replied, her voice suddenly quieter, more serious. "It was always part of the prophecy." Caelith frowned. "What prophecy?" "The one that speaks of the chosen one, the one who would wield the blade to seal the darkness. And now that you've pulled it from the stone, the demon is awake." Caelith looked down at the glowing sword in his hand. Its power was undeniable, but so was the demon's. He didn't know how or why, but he felt as though something had been awakened in him as well, a power that could stand against the creature before them. The demon roared once more, its fiery wings flapping and casting fiery embers across the ground. Caelith raised the sword, holding it steady, his eyes locked onto the demon's glowing gaze. Silara stood ready at his side, her daggers flashing in the dim light, waiting for the moment to strike. The ground beneath their feet cracked as the demon stepped forward, its massive clawed feet crushing the earth. But Caelith was not afraid. He took a step toward the creature, the sword humming with power in his grip. "Let's finish this," Silara said quietly, her voice firm. She dashed forward, her daggers aimed at the beast, her movements swift and precise. Caelith charged, the sword raised high, its glow intensifying with every step. He thrust it into the demon's chest, the blade cutting through its fiery flesh like a knife through paper. The demon howled, a sound filled with rage and agony as the sword's power began to pull the very essence of the creature from its body. It staggered, wings flailing wildly, but Caelith pushed forward, his sword driven deep into the creature's heart. Silara leapt into the fray, her daggers striking at the demon's wings, cutting through the smoke and flame. Together they worked in tandem, Caelith's strength and Silara's agility a perfect balance against the raging demon. With one final resounding roar, the creature disintegrated into ash, the fiery rift sealing behind it. As the last remnants of the demon faded into the wind, Caelith and Silara stood together, breathless but victorious. The forest around them had grown eerily still, the tension that had been in the air now gone. The glowing sword still in Caelith's hand seemed to dim slightly, its power ebbing as the immediate threat passed. Caelith lowered the sword, looking at Silara. "It's done," he said, his voice uncertain, the weight of what had just happened settling on his shoulders. "Not yet," Silara replied, her eyes scanning the clearing. "The demon was just a herald. There's more to this than we've seen." Caelith nodded, the realization of her words sinking in. The journey ahead would be filled with unknown dangers and ancient powers, but the path was clear. They would face it together.